Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into this absolute bombshell that just dropped about Shedeur Sanders and the Cleveland Browns, I need your help real quick. We're pushing hard to hit that 1,000 subscriber milestone, and every single subscription gets us closer. If you're getting value from this content, hit that subscribe button right now, and let's build this community together. Now, let's get into it. You're not going to believe what just came out. Ross Tucker, the CBS analyst who was right there calling Shedeur's first NFL start, just went on record and basically admitted that Kevin Stefanski and the Browns organization have been playing games with this kid's career for 6 months straight. And I'm not talking about some vague criticism or subtle jabs. Tucker literally said on air that the Browns fixed Shedeur's biggest weakness in 1 week, one single week. After keeping him buried on the depth chart behind Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, and Deshaun Watson for half a year, they suddenly figured out how to develop him in 7 days. Make that make sense. So Ross Tucker sits down for this interview, and right off the bat, the hosts ask him to grade Shedeur's first career start against the Raiders. And Tucker doesn't hold back. He says, yeah, I thought it was really positive, probably better than I thought it would be. Now, on the surface, that sounds like standard analyst speak, right? But then he keeps going, and this is where it gets interesting. Tucker explains that going into the game, he expected Shedeur to be better than he was in that second half against Baltimore when he got thrown in there with zero preparation. Because against the Ravens, Shedeur hadn't gotten any reps with the first team. The game plan wasn't designed for him. He was basically set up to fail from the jump. So Tucker figured with a full week of practice, Shedeur would naturally perform better. And he did, but here's the kicker that nobody's talking about enough. Tucker drops this line that should have every single Browns fan absolutely furious right now. He says, what I didn't think, and I didn't think he would improve that quickly in terms of not bailing out of the back of the pocket. He did that all the time at Colorado, and it felt like in 1 week the Browns fixed that. Let me say that again slower for the people in the back who might have missed it. In 1 week, the Browns fixed that. 1 week, 7 days. So if the coaching staff could identify Shedeur's tendency to bail out of the pocket too early, if they could diagnose that issue and correct it in the span of one preparation week, then somebody needs to explain to me why Kevin Stefanski refused to give this kid meaningful first-team reps for 6 months. Why was Shedeur running scout team while Deshaun Watson was out there looking completely washed? Why was he fourth on the depth chart when the coaching staff clearly had the tools and ability to develop him? And Tucker even admits he's a little surprised the Raiders didn't bring more pressure against Shedeur. He says, I thought they would throw the kitchen sink at him like the Ravens did, but for whatever reason, the Raiders decided to play a lot of coverage instead. So even Las Vegas didn't respect Shedeur enough as a threat to dial up the blitz packages, and he still went out there and carved them up for over 200 yards, including that absolute missile to Isaiah Bond for 52 yards. That was the longest pass play the Browns had all season, by the way. Not from Deshaun Watson, not from any of the veteran quarterbacks, from the rookie making his first career start with 1 week of preparation. Now let's talk about what Tucker observed during the actual game, because this matters. He specifically calls out Shedeur's pocket presence, the quick release at times, and the ability to step up in the pocket when pressure came. Tucker mentions that he spoke with Browns offensive lineman Joel Bitonio the day before the game, and Bitonio told him they had really hammered that point home with Shedeur during practice. They told him, hey man, you've got to step up. If you step up in the pocket, we will protect you. We will be there for you. And you know what happened? That offensive line went out and had probably their best performance of the entire season in terms of pass protection. Tucker said it himself. So the offensive line believed in Shedeur enough to give him their A game. The defensive players like Myles Garrett were out there on the sideline geeking out over his arm talent after that bomb to Bond. The entire roster rallied around this rookie quarterback who finally got his opportunity. But Kevin Stefanski, the head coach, wouldn't even give Shedeur a game ball after he became the first Browns rookie quarterback to win his debut in 30 years. Let that marinate for a minute. Tucker breaks down specific plays that stood out to him, and this is important context that a lot of people glossed over in the aftermath. He talks about the throw to Jerry Jeudy where Shedeur could have just dumped it off to the flat to David Njoku or Austin Fannin, But instead, he stayed poised, he stayed composed, he let the play develop, and suddenly Judy was wide open downfield. Tucker says that's not a rookie play. That's veteran pocket presence. That's a quarterback who trusts his progressions and doesn't panic when the first read isn't there. And Shedeur did that in his very first start with only 1 week of first-team reps. Then Tucker talks about that throw to Isaiah Bond, and he just calls it incredible. Shedeur is rolling to his right. He's got Raiders defenders bearing down on him. He's about to get absolutely demolished, and he still delivers a perfect deep ball, 52 yards downfield right into Bond's hands in stride. Myles Garrett literally put his hand on his head in disbelief watching that throw from the sideline. Even the defensive guys couldn't believe what they just witnessed. But here's where Tucker really drops the hammer. He says, you combine the throw to Bond and the throw to Judy. Those were two plays that I didn't really see Deshaun Watson making those types of plays when he was out there. Boom. There it is. A respected NFL analyst with years of experience just confirmed on the record that Shedeur made throws in his first start that Deshaun Watson, who's been getting all the first-team reps since training camp and making $46 million a year, never made in multiple seasons as Cleveland's starter. Watson went out there and looked completely cooked all year, throwing hospital balls, missing open receivers, holding on to the ball too long. But Kevin Stefanski kept trotting him out there week after week, while Shedeur sat on the bench watching inferior quarterback play. Now, Tucker also had a chance to sit down and talk with Shedeur directly, and what he learned from that conversation should tell you everything you need to know about this kid's mentality. Tucker tells Shedeur, I'm reading all these reports that you're cramming for a test. It sounds like you're trying to learn everything in 1 week. And Shedeur's response is just simple and direct. He says, I don't have a choice. This is my opportunity. Think about the weight of that statement for a second. Shedeur Sanders spent 6 months being told he wasn't good enough for this level, 6 months watching quarterbacks who couldn't hold his jockstrap get opportunities ahead of him, 6 months dealing with whispers that his own coaching staff didn't believe in him and maybe even actively didn't want him on the roster. And when he finally got his chance, with the whole world watching and ready to criticize every single mistake, he didn't make excuses. He didn't complain about the lack of preparation time. He said, I don't have a choice. This is my opportunity. And then he went out and seized it. Tucker says he has a healthy respect for the way Shedeur understood and embraced just how important that Sunday was, quite frankly, for the rest of his life. That's a powerful statement coming from a former NFL player who's been around thousands of athletes. Tucker specifically calls out things Shedeur said in their conversation that impressed him. Shedeur told him he felt like he was getting back to normal being a starting quarterback, that he wasn't used to being a backup, and that he wanted all the pressure on him. That's not typical rookie talk. Most young quarterbacks try to deflect pressure, talk about taking it one day at a time, all the usual cliches. But Shedeur was different. He embraced the magnitude of the moment because he's been preparing for moments like this his entire life. Tucker asked Shedeur how nice it was to finally get all the reps with the first team offense and be able to throw to the actual receivers he'd be playing with. And Shedeur's response shows incredible maturity and self-awareness. He said it was nice, but these are things that take time, and it's not going to all be fixed in 3 days. He acknowledged he was going up against two things that week, the Raiders' defense and time on task, because he simply didn't have enough time on task with the starters. But then he added, there are no excuses. It doesn't matter. I've got to figure it out. That's accountability. That's leadership. That's a quarterback who understands the challenge in front of him and refuses to hide behind circumstances, even when he was put in a legitimately terrible position by his coaching staff. Tucker makes this point beautifully when he says he greatly appreciated the fact that Shedeur understood just how big the moment was, and that he had a very clear understanding that it was not a perfect situation, but that you're not going to get perfect situations, and you have to make the most of the situation that you're given. And he did. Shedeur went out, and he did exactly that. He took the opportunity he was given after 6 months of being buried on the depth chart, and he proved that he belongs on an NFL field. Now, the question is, what happens next? And this is where things get really interesting from a bigger picture perspective. The host asked Tucker what Shedeur needs to do in the final 6 games of the season to at least make it a conversation about whether the Browns go into the offseason with him as the starter. And Tucker laid out 3 realistic scenarios. First scenario, Shedeur plays so well that he's unquestionably the guy, and there's no debate about it. Second scenario, he plays well enough that he might be the guy, but the Browns are going to bring in competition because they're not completely sure yet. Third scenario, he doesn't show enough and the organization decides he's not the answer and they go out and get somebody else in the draft or free agency. But then Tucker said something really smart that not enough people are considering. The more games Shedeur wins, the less chance the Browns would have to draft his replacement. Because if Cleveland keeps winning and finishes the season at something like 8-9 or even 9-8, they're not going to have a high enough draft pick to get one of the elite quarterback prospects in next year's draft, which means Shedeur would only be competing against mid-round guys who probably aren't better than him anyway. Tucker's advice to Shedeur is simple but crucial. He needs to just keep winning, but also he needs to show continued improvement week to week. Tucker says Shedeur made major strides from the Ravens game to his first start, and he's beyond excited to see what happens in the second start. But Tucker also adds the realistic caveat that every analyst should be honest about. Shedeur's going to have a bad game at some point. He's going to make mistakes. He's a rookie quarterback who didn't get proper development time, so there are going to be growing pains. The key is whether he's improving on a weekly basis, because if the Browns see significant improvement week over week, then they can get really excited about what he might look like with a full offseason program. You know, with OTAS and training camp and everything, working with the receivers and being the clear number one guy from day one. And that brings me back to the central question that nobody in Cleveland's front office seems willing to answer, honestly. If Kevin Stefanski and this coaching staff are good enough to fix Shedeur's pocket presence issues in 1 week, if they can develop one of the best defenses in the entire NFL, if they can create game plans that give their team a chance to win every single Sunday, then why did they bury Shedeur Sanders for 6 months? Ross Tucker basically answered that question without meaning to when he talked about how surprised he was that the Raiders didn't bring more pressure. Even opposing teams didn't respect Shedeur as a threat because he'd been sitting on the bench all year with no tape, no track record at this level. The Raiders played soft coverage and let Shedeur pick them apart, and he still made them pay with that deep shot to Bond and several other impressive throws. Now imagine if Kevin Stefanski had given Shedeur first-team reps from the beginning of training camp. Imagine if Shedeur had spent the preseason building chemistry with the starting offense, learning the playbook with actual game reps instead of scout teamwork. Imagine if the Browns had designed their offensive system around Shedeur's strengths, his quick release, his arm talent, his mobility. Instead of trying to force him into Deshaun Watson's framework, Shedeur might be 5-1 or 6, and as a starter right now instead of 1-0, the Browns might be in playoff contention instead of playing out the string on another lost season. Tucker told TMZ Sports this week that Shedeur is maybe the most polarizing player he's ever called in his broadcasting career. He said it's fascinating how people can't wait to be right one way or the other when it comes to Shedeur Sanders. And that's absolutely true, isn't it? There's one group of people who desperately want Shedeur to fail so they can say, I told you so, he was overhyped, his dad's too loud, he's not built for this level. Then there's another group who want him to succeed because they see the talent, they see the work ethic, they see the unfair treatment he's received from coaches and media members who made up their minds about him before he ever took a snap. Ross Tucker clearly falls into the second camp after calling that Raiders game and having personal conversations with Shedeur. Tucker walked away impressed with his maturity, his preparation, his understanding of what that moment meant for his career. The fact that Tucker keeps emphasizing how Shedeur improved from the Ravens game to the Raiders game in just 1 week should be ringing alarm bells all over Cleveland's front office. Because if a rookie can make that kind of jump with limited preparation, what does that say about the development program he was stuck in for the previous 6 months? What does it say about the decision-making process that kept him fourth on the depth chart? Kevin Stefanski has a lot of questions to answer, and Browns fans deserve honest answers instead of the corporate speak they've been getting all season. Tucker said he's beyond excited to see what Shedeur does in his second start against the 49ers, and honestly, so is everyone else who's been paying attention. San Francisco's defense is no joke. They've got some serious talent on that side of the ball, but they're also dealing with injuries, and they've had their own struggles this season. If Shedeur can go into that stadium and get a win, He'll make history as the first Browns rookie quarterback to ever win his first 2 starts. That's the kind of achievement that changes narratives and forces organizations to commit to a player. That's the kind of performance that makes it impossible for Kevin Stefanski to go back to Deshaun Watson, even if he wanted to. One thing Tucker mentioned that really stood out to me was his conversation with Joel Bitonio about the offensive line's approach to protecting Shedeur. The fact that they specifically worked on getting him to trust stepping up in the pocket, and then they went out and gave him their best performance of the year that tells you everything about how the locker room feels about this kid. Players know. They can tell when someone has it and when someone doesn't. They can tell when a quarterback makes the right reads, delivers accurate balls, and shows leadership in the huddle. And clearly, the Browns' offensive line saw enough from Shedeur in practice that week to believe in him and want to play their best football for him. Compare that to how the offense looked with Deshaun Watson, where receivers were running the wrong routes, the line couldn't keep him clean, and the whole operation felt disjointed and lifeless. There's a reason why Cleveland's offense suddenly looked competent and functional with Shedeur under center. It's not because he's perfect or because he doesn't have things to work on. It's because he brings energy, confidence, and decisiveness that's been missing from that quarterback position all season long. Tucker also made an interesting point about the Browns defense being one of the 2 best in the NFL along with Houston. He specifically called out Mo Hurst and the defensive tackles for making a huge difference, saying everybody should be buying Mo Hurst jerseys if they haven't already. And he's right. That defensive front is absolutely dominant. But here's the thing. When you have an elite defense like that, every single game is winnable if your offense can just be average. You know, the Browns don't need Shedeur to go out and throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns every week. They need him to be efficient, protect the football, make the throws that are there, and not put the defense in bad positions. And in his first start, that's exactly what he did. He didn't try to do too much. He took what the defense gave him, and he made a couple of big-time throws when the opportunity presented itself. The deep ball to Isaiah Bond wasn't just a great throw, it was a statement. It showed that Shedeur has the arm talent to push the ball downfield and attack defenses vertically, something Deshaun Watson hasn't been able to do consistently in years. That one play probably did more for Shedeur's credibility with his teammates and coaches than anything else he could have done in that game, because now defenses have to respect the deep ball. They can't just sit on short and intermediate routes. They have to honor Shedeur's ability to go over the top. And that opens up everything else in the offense. Tucker talked about how Shedeur described getting back to normal as a starting quarterback, and I think that's a really important insight into his mindset. For a kid who started multiple years at both Jackson State and Colorado, who's been the guy his entire football life, sitting on the bench for 6 months had to be torture. Not because of ego, but because competitors want to compete. They want to be out there. They want the ball in their hands in critical situations. They want the pressure and responsibility that comes with being the starting quarterback. And when you take that away from someone, especially someone who's earned it through their performance and preparation, it messes with their development and confidence. The fact that Shedeur was able to mentally handle 6 months of being buried on the depth chart and then come out and perform at a high level in his first opportunity says everything about his mental toughness and resilience. A lot of young quarterbacks would have sulked, would have let the situation affect their preparation, would have checked out mentally, but Shedeur stayed ready, kept working, and when his number was called, he delivered. That's the kind of character trait you can't coach. You either have it or you don't. Now, Tucker did add the caveat that Shedeur's going to have a bad game at some point, and that's important for Browns fans to remember. There's going to be a week where the throws aren't falling, where he forces a couple of passes, where the offense struggles, and people start questioning everything again. That's just part of developing a rookie quarterback. The key is how he responds to adversity and whether he continues to improve over the course of the season. If Shedeur has a rough game and then bounces back strong the next week, that tells you everything you need to know about his ability to handle this level. What's really frustrating for Cleveland fans is knowing that this whole situation could have been avoided if Kevin Stefanski had just given Shedeur a fair shot from the beginning. Think about how much further along he'd be right now if he'd been getting first-team reps since August. Think about how much more comfortable he'd be with the offense, how much better his chemistry would be with the receivers, how much more confident he'd feel in the pocket. Instead, the Browns wasted 6 months of development time for no legitimate reason, and now they're playing catch-up, trying to evaluate whether Shedeur can be their franchise guy in just 6 games. Tucker's point about time on task is crucial here. Shedeur acknowledged that he was fighting against the clock in his first start because he simply hadn't had enough time working with the starters. But even with that disadvantage, he still outperformed what Deshaun Watson had done all season. So what happens when Shedeur gets a full offseason? What happens when he has months to study the playbook, work with the receivers, develop timing and chemistry, and fine-tune his mechanics? If he can play this well with 1 week of preparation, the ceiling for what he could become with proper development time is incredibly high. The Browns are sitting at 3-8 right now. Their playoff hopes are basically dead, so there's no reason not to ride with Shedeur for the rest of the season and see what they have. Give him the full 6 games, let him develop and grow, and then make an informed decision in the offseason about whether he's the franchise quarterback or whether they need to look elsewhere. But after watching what he did against the Raiders with minimal preparation, it seems pretty clear that Shedeur Sanders has the talent and mental makeup to succeed at this level if the organization commits to him. Ross Tucker just gave us the most honest and thorough evaluation of Shedeur's debut that we've heard from any analyst. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He acknowledged the areas where Shedeur needs to improve, but he also gave credit where it was due and recognized that this kid did something special in his first start. The fact that Tucker walked away impressed after having personal conversations with Shedeur and watching him up close tells you everything you need to know. This isn't just media hype or clickbait headlines. This is a legitimate evaluation from someone who knows football and knows what it takes to succeed at the quarterback position in the NFL. So here's what needs to happen next. Kevin Stefanski needs to come out and publicly commit to Shedeur Sanders as his starting quarterback for the rest of the season. No games, no hedging, no keeping options open. Just come out and say Shedeur is our guy and we're rolling with him. Give him the confidence of knowing he's not going to get yanked after one bad game. Give him the security of knowing the coaching staff believes in him and is invested in his development. And then let him play and see what happens. Because if the Browns could fix his biggest weakness in 1 week, imagine what they can do with 6 more games and a full offseason to work with him. Shedeur Sanders is 1-0 as an NFL starter. He's about to face the 49ers at home in front of what should be an electric crowd. If he goes out and wins that game, the narrative completely changes, and the Browns have no choice but to make him the unquestioned starter moving forward. Ross Tucker is beyond excited to see what happens next. Cleveland fans are beyond excited, and honestly, anyone who appreciates good quarterback play should be tuning in to watch this kid develop because we might be witnessing the beginning of something special. The Browns just need to get out of their own way and let it happen.